Welcome to the Deconstruction Deep Dive.
The show that doesn't just accept the story.
We break it
We examine the pieces.
and expose the machinery inside.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so today we're really undertaking a serious structural analysis.
Yeah, putting on the safety goggles, maybe getting at the intellectual crowbar.
That's definitely, because we are preparing to deconstruct, well, nothing less than what you might call the Cathedral of Communication theory.
Right, the one built by, one of the modern world's really foremost leadership gurus.
Exactly. And this framework, it's practically become gospel for millions, hasn't it? It defines what it means to connect, to lead, to influence.
It really does. So our mission today, it's a critical structural analysis of this major communication model.
The one that, sells millions of books, inspires countless seminars, all by promising this idea of connection mastery.
And the source material we're working from, it's this critical analysis document. It traces this fundamental tension.
A really crucial tension.
Yeah, the conflict between, raw anecdotal expertise, the whole I've done this 13,000 times mentality.
Right, that specific number comes up.
It does. And the conflict between that and, the necessary requirement for empirical scientific validation.
Okay, so here's the big question we're tackling, the sort of mission statement for this whole deep dive. What if the communication secrets taught by, arguably, the world's top guru, what if they weren't just incomplete? What if they were maybe subtly designed, perhaps even unintentionally, to keep you, the learner, from truly connecting?
How so?
Because maybe the secrets only really, truly work for the rock star who perfected them in the first place.
Ah, okay. So we're exposing the machinery inside this system, pulling back the velvet curtain, so to speak.
Exactly. On the architecture of connection. We want to see if it's built on, universal truth.
Or just personalized charisma, built for the one, not the many.
Precisely.
Okay, so let's start right at the foundation. Because, look, to critique this framework properly, we really have to understand its immense appeal.
Yeah, why do people flock to it? It's clearly not just practical advice, is it? It's framed almost like a moral imperative.
That's exactly the word. Compelling. The core philosophical position is what they call service-oriented communication.
Service-oriented, okay.
And it provides this immediate antidote, almost, to public speaking anxiety. The reason it feels so comforting, so accessible, is that it removes the ego from the equation right away. It starts with this primary axiom, which is really the moral core of the whole system. It's about them, not you.
Okay. That is instantly compelling because it positions the audience, the listener, not just as a recipient of information, but as the primary intended beneficiary of the speaker's efforts. It fundamentally reframes communication away from being a performance
to being an act of service.
Yeah. And this requires the speaker to, undergo some kind of profound psychological shift. The analysis calls it a requirement for self-transcendence.
Exactly. You must get over yourself to achieve connection.
Yeah.
And think about the mental load this removes, right? If you're worried about yourself, your nerves, your outfit, how you sound you are, fundamentally failing the ethical imperative of the framework.
You can't serve the audience while you're stuck focusing on your own insecurities.
Precisely. It's a powerful internal mechanism for, conquering stage fright, essentially.
And this philosophical transformation, it's mirrored in the speaker's career path, right? The progression they talk about.
That's right. The model states you must move from focusing on personal achievement, which it calls success.
Okay, success.
To focusing entirely on audience impact. And that's elevated to the level of significance.
Significance. So it elevates the whole pursuit.
It really does.
Yeah.
Success is framed as temporary, self-serving. Significance, though, that's lasting because it serves others.
It implies the master communicator stops chasing applause and starts chasing actual transformation in the lives of the audience. The highest praise isn't, you were great, but...
You changed me. That's the goal.
Okay. And where does the speaker's moral authority come from in this system? It's clearly not from, a peer-reviewed journal.
Definitely not. It's explicitly stated. Authenticity is derived from lived experience, not just theoretical knowledge.
Lived experience.
The guru's credibility is earned on the road, right? Having delivered supposedly thousands of speeches, encountering every possible audience reaction.
And refining the principles through decades of trial and error.
Exactly. So you're asked to trust the experienced practitioner over, say, the academic theorist.
And this reliance on personal experience, it makes the system feel gritty real, doesn't it?
It does. But, as we're going to see later, That's also where its biggest structural weakness lies.
Okay, so we've established this compelling philosophy, but let's pivot now, Solarian. Let's unpack this concept of law. These aren't just presented as best practices, are they?
No, not at all. They're delivered as universal, repeatable truths. And that's, the pivot point for the skeptic in me.
Yeah, I can see that. When you call something a law, like the law of gravity.
Right. Or thermodynamics. You imply universality, testability, inevitability. And this framework presents its operational principles in exactly the same way.
Okay, so the first one, the most obvious, is the law of connecting.
Yeah, communication efficacy is directly proportional to audience focus. Simple as that.
If your attention drifts from the audience's needs, your effectiveness just drops instantly. It's presented as a very clean input-output mechanism.
Very clean. Then there's the immensely powerful law of storytelling. This is really where the framework tries to separate itself from the dry, content-heavy lecture model.
Okay.
It states that narrative transportation supersedes factual transmission. And the key phrase, the one everyone remembers.
Facts tell, stories sell.
That's the one.
And that taps into something fundamental about human wiring, doesn't it? Our brains are just hardwired for narrative. We encode information better when it's wrapped in context, character, conflict.
We do. The framework basically forces the speaker to acknowledge that the data point, no matter how rigorous, is kind of useless until it's applied to a human experience.
Okay. And here's the law you mentioned we absolutely have to drill into, the one that becomes the axis for the whole deconstruction.
Yes, the law of the pause, strategic silence. In this system, it's not just, a stylistic choice or taking a breath.
No.
It's deemed essential, a required mechanical action almost, to amplify the message impact and, crucially, enable cognitive processing for the audience.
Right. It's like the moment of cognitive catch-up. The speaker drops a big idea, a truth, and then they have to hold the space to allow the significance of that truth to actually land, to be processed, for the audience to recognize the emotional weight.
It gives the audience credit for having a working brain that needs time to compute, essentially.
Instead of
just throwing truth at them rapid fire, forcing them to stay in the shallow end of processing. The pause is positioned as the mechanism that forces depth.
Okay. And finally, anchoring all this idealism, there's the law of preparation.
Right, which grounds the philosophical laws in reality. Mastery requires intentional practice, way beyond just relying on natural giftedness.
You can't just be charismatic, you have to work the system, which I guess provides some hope. It suggests the system is teachable.
In theory, even if the pause is. Well, like you said, we'll definitely get back to that.
Okay. So we have a system that looks morally appealing, structurally elegant, and it demands hard work. It seems like the perfect blueprint.
On the surface, yes. But now we need to look beneath that surface, at the actual mechanics provided to the average speaker trying to use this.
All right. So we've established the why, that moral foundation. Now let's look at the how. How is this philosophy actually operationalized? What specific tools, what steps are given to the speaker to achieve this high state of connection?
Well, the framework is actually far more detailed than most people probably realize. It's not just, a collection of nice-sounding aphorisms. It's a clear three-stage communication process model.
Three-stage?
Yeah, it's almost like an engineering approach to generating empathy on demand.
Okay, interesting. So the journey begins, according to the analysis, with audience diagnosis.
Correct. Before you even think about writing the first slide, the speaker must deploy the 4 F's of awareness. That's feel, felt, found, find.
Feel, felt, found, find. Okay, let's break this down in detail because the analysis says this is the core mechanism that forces the speaker to internalize the audience's perspective.
Exactly. The 4 F's act as a structured psychological exercise. So, feel. What is the audience currently feeling right now? What are they struggling with or wishing for regarding this specific topic?
Okay, so that forces emotional intelligence right off the bat.
It does. Then, felt. What is the shared experience you, the speaker, have had that connects with what they're feeling? This is where the speaker uses their past self, the imperfect earlier version, to establish relatability. I know how you feel because I felt that way too.
Right, building that bridge, and then crucially using that internal map to move forward. So found. What specific solution or insight or path did you, the speaker, find to overcome the challenge you just related to and felt?
This legitimizes the speaker's present authority. I was there, but I found a way out. And finally, find. What specific action or understanding should the audience now find or achieve as a result of hearing this?
It's like a structured path for resolving cognitive dissonance.
Precisely. The speaker identifies the audience's current tension, feel, uses their own resolved tension felt and found as the bridge, and then provides a clear map forward, find.
Which, in theory, guarantees the content is personalized and actionable.
That's the goal. Once that diagnosis is complete, we move into stage 2, content development.
Okay.
And the framework mandates this specific iterative path of transformation for your content. You have to move it from simplistic through complex,
right,
and then land back on simple again.
Simplistic, right arrow, complex, right arrow, simple. Why that specific path?
Well, it's crucial, and it links directly to, like, adult learning theory. You start with a simple hook, an easy-to-digest premise to get them interested.
Okay.
Then you dive into the complex phase. This is where you provide the evidence, the structure, the nuance, the data, all the qualifications. But if you just stop there,
the audience would be overwhelmed, lost in the weeds.
Exactly. So the mandate is to land back on a powerful, memorable, and actionable simple conclusion. This final phase creates that distilled mental model the audience actually walks away with.
The takeaway that fits on a napkin, basically.
That's a good way to put it. It ensures cognitive closure, which is essential for memory encoding. You prove you understand the complex stuff, but you deliver the simple, memorable essence.
Okay, makes sense. And then the final stage.
Stage 3 is delivery execution. And the model is pretty demanding here. It requires what they call halftime adjustments.
Halftime adjustments, like in sports.
Exactly like that. It means communication is fundamentally treated like a responsive, dynamic sport, not just a static monologue you deliver regardless.
So the speaker has to be like an active sensor, reading the audience in real time.
Constantly. Their body language, their energy levels, their visual engagement, are they looking at their phones? And based on that feedback, making instant pivots in pacing or tone or emphasis.
So if the audience looks glazed over during the complex bit,
the speaker has to adjust immediately. Maybe shorten that section, deploy another story, ask a question, something to re-engage them.
It's the absolute antithesis of the speaker who just stares blankly into the middle distance and delivers a canned message, word for word.
Completely. It demands relentless, high-level attention and adaptability. It treats the audience as a dynamic feedback system whose needs, in that moment, supersede the prepared script.
Okay. Now let's talk about the fuel for this whole engine. The narrative infrastructure. This is where the emotional transportation is supposed to happen, and the analysis suggests it's profoundly structured.
Oh, absolutely. It's not accidental. No. The core tool, the blueprint, is summed up as me stories with you meaning.
Me stories with you meaning.
That's the mandatory formula. A personal anecdote is never shared for simple catharsis, or just because it's interesting. It has to be a strategic data point that is explicitly universalized for the audience.
So the speaker's life is the laboratory,
right?
But the audience must be the direct, identified beneficiary of the findings. Here's what my experience means for you.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And to make those stories really stick, the framework employs what the analysis calls dimensional storytelling. It uses temporal layering.
Temporal layering, meaning?
Using your past self, your present self, and your future self as strategic characters within your narrative.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
How does that work psychologically?
Well, the layering is quite brilliant psychologically. The past self is presented as your most vulnerable, relatable figure. They made mistakes, they struggled, maybe they were ignorant. That builds the initial connection.
Okay.
The present self is the expert. They're credible because they learned the lesson from that past struggle. They embody the found stage of the 4 Fs. And the future self is aspirational. They show the audience what's possible if they adopt the lesson being taught. By stacking these temporal layers, the speaker builds this 3-dimensional experience that the listener can project their own journey onto.
Which brings us to maybe the most powerful and, as the analysis suggests, arguably the most calculating tool in the box. Vulnerability deployment.
Yes. And let's be very clear about the nuance here. Based on the analysis, this isn't just random transparency or oversharing.
No.
It is the strategic sharing of failure, not just success, specifically engineered to build authenticity and create that emotional transportation.
Okay, vulnerability as a calculated asset.
That's how the analysis frames it. It's not necessarily authentic, spontaneous disclosure. It's strategic self-disclosure. The failures shared are very carefully curated.
Curated how?
They have to be failures that are either far enough in the past to be clearly resolved, or failures that highlight a relatable weakness without damaging the speaker's core competence or authority on the topic at hand. You don't share a failure that makes the audience doubt your expertise now.
The goal, then, is to build a shared experiential space.
Exactly. When the audience sees the high-status guru admit a failure they themselves have experienced or fear, the power dynamic momentarily shifts. The audience thinks, wow, if they failed at that and recovered, maybe I can follow their map out of my own struggle.
So this calculated use of personal hardship is what gives the framework its claimed moral authority and connection power.
That's the argument. So what we actually have here is a surprisingly rigorous, high-level structural architecture.
Masked by the simple, warm language of connection and service.
Exactly. The sophistication is hidden in plain sight. And because it's so structured, well, now we can bring out the scalpel and start looking for the inevitable points of fracture.
Okay, we've admired the architecture, the intricate machinery, but now it's time to see where the structure fundamentally fails its own promises. Let's target the fundamental tensions, the paradoxes that undermine the framework's own core claims of universality and selflessness.
All right, let's hit the biggest contradiction right out of the gate. Paradox 1. Selfless communication versus the unavoidable power differential.
Okay, so if the primary axiom is it's about them, not you, demanding selflessness from the speaker, how does that ever reconcile with the unavoidable reality of the speaker's own, often global, celebrity status?
It just doesn't, really. It creates an immediate and arguably irreparable contradiction. The very manifestation of this framework working flawlessly
is the creation of a massive power differential.
Exactly. The speaker achieves celebrity status. Oh. So when a guru who has sold, tens of millions of books and commands staggering speaking fees walks onto a stage,
the audience isn't meeting an equal?
Not at all. They're encountering an icon. They're there partly because of the status.
And this fact, this reality, fundamentally undermines the whole egalitarian connection premise, doesn't it?
Completely. The audience is there in large part to consume expertise, yes, but also the spectacle, the aura of success. And the psychological effect is profound. The audience's awe, their reverence for the guru's authority. It inadvertently prevents them from fully internalizing the "it's about them" axiom in a balanced way.
Because it is kind of about the guru in that context.
The connection becomes asymmetrical. The audience isn't really collaborating and meaning-making in that scenario. They are, to some extent, worshiping the validated authority figure. To trust the message, they first have to accept the speaker's inherent superiority, or at least their achieved status.
So the structural necessity, the need for the guru to be famous and successful to sell the framework widely, actually violates the moral core of the framework itself.
That's the paradox. The system requires the speaker to transcend themselves, but the system's success simultaneously elevates them into this non-transcendent position of massive authority. It cancels itself out in a way.
Wow. That's a really powerful point. The very success of the model becomes its own contradiction.
Okay, let's move to the scientific gap. Paradox 2. Anecdotal authority versus empirical validation. What is the evidence base for these so-called universal laws?
Well, as we touch on, the evidence base is described as a personal experience portfolio.
Right, the 13,000 speeches number.
Exactly. The source material quantifies this specifically. 13,000 speeches given over a career. Now, in terms of sheer volume, that quantity is impressive, no doubt.
But scientifically?
Scientifically, it's still N1. Repeatedly tested, perhaps, but by a single, presumably highly gifted individual.
So the primary data boils down to, it worked for me, the highly charismatic individual who wrote the book, 13,000 times.
Pretty much. And the validation method that's cited is purely commercial or based on audience reaction?
Applause, book sales, repeat business, positive feedback forms.
Right. It's a validation of a successful business model, a successful performance model, perhaps. But it's not a validation of universal cognitive law.
And the core flaw identified in the analysis. The flaw is that the framework, despite all this extensive field testing by one person, lacks crucial empirical validation from broader scientific methods. We see very limited integration of verifiable modern research. Like no deep dive into neuroscience to explain why storytelling works neurologically. No rigorous psychological studies cited to support why the 4 F's actually create empathy reliably across different people, or how vulnerability deployment maps onto brain chemistry in a predictable, repeatable way across diverse populations.
So it's a system built heavily on correlation and observation. When I did X, the audience generally seemed to do Y.
Exactly. But it doesn't provide the causal mechanism, the scientific why. And for you, the learner, this means you're essentially asked to follow instructions based on faith in the guru's personal experience.
Not based on proven neurological or psychological science that applies to humans more broadly.
Which brings us to arguably the most damaging structural tension, especially for the average learner trying to actually implement this system, Paradox 3, the teachability gap.
Ah, yes. If the goal is to democratize effective communication, make it accessible to everyone, why are some of the core mechanics seemingly impossible to transfer effectively?
Then we return, inevitably, to the specific skill at issue, the law of the pause.
Which the source material itself, the framework's own documentation, explicitly cites as being both essential to the entire delivery execution.
And labels it, and this is a direct quote referenced in the analysis, the most difficult skill to coach.
The most difficult skill to coach.
That's the phrase. This isn't just some minor flaw or quirk. The analysis positions this as a central structural crack in the foundation of the framework's teachability.
Because at the fundamental amplifier of the message, the tool that supposedly ensures cognitive processing, if that relies entirely on tacit, internalized timing, stage presence, confidence, things that often only come from decades of innate charisma or just sheer volume of practice.
Then you have a massive methodology accessibility issue, don't you?
Yeah.
How do you objectively measure the difference between a naturally dramatic, effective pause from a master and a novice speaker simply forgetting their next line?
You really can't. It relies on the speaker's internalized rhythm, their feel for the room, which is notoriously difficult, if not impossible, to codify and teach systematically.
The irony is just palpable, isn't it? The system promises to structure communication, make it reliable. But its most vital component for impact, the pause, relies on uncodified artistry, on intuition.
Which means the framework isn't truly a transferable science for everyone. It's more like a reflection of the guru's unique, perfected mastery.
Exactly. You can learn the SEPs, the 4Fs, the story structure, but replicating the soul, the timing, the presence that makes it work at that high level, that's another story entirely.
The replicability concern here is profound. The framework might be a fantastic roadmap for the guru,
but potentially a dead end, or at least a very frustrating journey, for the student who doesn't have 13,000 speaking engagements lined up in their future to maybe eventually internalize it.
So the student is essentially buying a system designed, maybe unintentionally, to replicate an individual, highly specific talent,
rather than truly universal, scientifically grounded principles that anyone can learn and apply effectively with structured practice.
Okay, so now, Lunaria, to really understand the success of this framework, despite these flaws we're pointing out, we have to place it historically. It didn't just appear in a vacuum, right?
No, definitely not. The analysis argues it was, in many ways, a necessary reaction against failing communication models of the past.
Exactly. So let's explore the historical context. Why Maxwell works compared to failures. This helps us appreciate the genius of the innovation, perhaps, even as we dismantle the structural flaws.
Okay, where do we start historically?
Well, let's first consider the 19th century oratory model. Think of the classic booming orator. This model was focused so heavily on performance, right? Using elaborate rhetorical flourishes, very complex sentence structures.
And it was entirely speaker-centric. The goal was primarily to impress the audience with the speaker's brilliance, their complexity, their vocabulary. It was a display.
And audiences presumably grew tired of being talked at by some verbal acrobat who seemed to only care about their own cleverness.
That's the critique. But here's my challenge back to you, based on our earlier points. Isn't the guru model we're discussing just a slicker version of that? 19th century oratory repackaged with a thin moral layer of service.
Ah, that's a really sharp question. What is the actual difference then, according to the analysis?
The difference, the analysis argues, lies fundamentally in that service axiom. Maxwell differentiated by retaining the high-performance elements, the staging, the presence, the charisma, are still crucial.
Okay.
But layering the service imperative over it. And that shift was actually quite revolutionary for its time. I will perform for your benefit to help you achieve significance, not just perform at you for my own success.
That moral reframing made the spectacle, the performance, palatable again, acceptable, even desirable.
Exactly. And then fast forward a bit. More recently, we had the often painful corporate buzzword era of the 1990s.
Oh, yes. Synergy, paradigms, leveraging core competencies.
Right. Defined by jargon, abstraction, consultant-driven complexity, and management speak that often felt like it meant absolutely nothing concrete.
In the market, people and organizations were just screaming for clarity, for something practical, something they could actually use and get measurable results from.
Precisely. And Maxwell differentiated again by offering actionable principles with immediate application. The laws were simple, clear, memorable. They provided instant, digestible steps.
It met that huge pent-up demand for measurable, non-jargon-laden success strategies. It felt like the antidote to all that corporate abstraction.
It really did.
Yeah.
So we have to recognize its historical necessity, its appeal and context.
Yeah.
But, and this is the big but, it is now time to look at superior alternative frameworks that the analysis suggests are better built for the modern scientific and digital era.
Okay, where does the analysis point us first? It brings up the Socratic dialogue model.
Yes. And in principle, purely in principle, the Socratic model is inherently superior in one key way. Its foundation is question-based, not statement-based.
It doesn't just transmit information from speaker to passive audience.
Right. It aims to co-create truth, or at least understanding, through dialogue.
So its strength is that it's inherently co-creative and audience responsive by its very nature. If you adopt the Socratic method properly, the audience has to be actively participating in meaning making.
Absolutely. You're not delivering a prepared monologue. You're guiding a conversation, ideally forcing the audience to discover the conclusion themselves through reasoned inquiry.
However, there's always a however.
We have to be intellectually honest about scale.
No.
The major limitation of the pure Socratic method is its drastically reduced suitability for large-scale communication contexts.
Yeah, you can't really run a Socratic dialogue with 10,000 people in an arena.
Not effectively, no. And this really illustrates the difference the analysis draws between the cathedral, the high-impact one-to-many performance model, where the guru framework excels,
versus the forum, the intimate, perhaps many-to-many collaborative conversation where Socratic methods thrive.
Exactly. Different architectures for different purposes. But for a framework that tries to bridge that gap, combining high-impact connection with modern rigor, the analysis points decisively towards Brené Brown's research-based approach.
Okay. And the key difference here, the analysis stresses, is where the source of authority fundamentally flips.
Completely flips. This model offers a profound differentiation because it successfully integrates empirical social science, real academic rigor, with personal narrative for accessibility.
So Brown uses her own stories, much like Maxwell does.
Yes, but, and this is the crucial distinction, they are used as explicit anchors or illustrations for statistically validated phenomena derived from research on thousands of participants. The stories serve the data.
They aren't the sole proof of the methodology itself.
Precisely. Which highlights the critical difference the analysis draws between evidence-based vulnerability, Brown, versus Maxwell's experience-based vulnerability.
Explain that distinction more.
In a research-based framework like Brown's, the personal story is used strategically to illustrate a principle that has already been validated through rigorous, peer-reviewed research. If the personal story doesn't quite map onto the robust data, guess what gets discarded or revised?
The story. Because the data is the law.
Exactly. The data holds the ultimate authority. The guru framework, in contrast, essentially says, I did this 13,000 times, and it worked for me. Therefore, it's a law. The personal experience is the primary data and the validation.
Whereas the superior research-based framework says, effectively, the research shows this phenomenon is generally true for populations. Now, I will use my personal experience merely to make this universal, validated truth relatable and understandable for you.
It completely reverses the source of authority, placing impartial, verifiable science above the subjective, albeit extensive, celebrity experience. And that, the analysis argues, is a much stronger foundation for a communication framework intended for broad application.
Okay, so if we accept the argument that the guru's framework is structurally flawed, primarily due to its reliance on celebrity anecdote over science, what do we need to add? How do we renovate it to build a communication system that actually works reliably for everyone today, based on modern research?
Right. We need a renovation blueprint, one that integrates scientific validation at every single level. We have to move beyond just observation and correlation. When I do this, they seem to do that, towards understanding and leveraging measurable causation.
So where does the analysis say we should start? It talks about neuroscience integration requirements.
Yes. If the law of storytelling is so central, for example, we need to scientifically validate why and how it works effectively. The analysis points towards focusing on mirror neuron activation.
Mirror are neurons? Remind us.
They're often called the brain's empathy highway, essentially. They are the neural basis of empathy and understanding others' actions and intentions. When a speaker tells a vivid, relatable story, those mirror neurons are thought to activate in the listener's brain as if they were performing the action or feeling the emotion themselves.
So we need studies.
We need functional MRI studies, for instance, to show definitively that a story following, say, the me stories with you, meaning formula, genuinely achieves higher measurable mirror neuron activation compared to just presenting dry, factual information.
That would provide the necessary empirical proof for narrative transportation beyond just saying stories sell.
Exactly. And what about the controversial pause? The analysis says we need to validate its function using cognitive load management theory.
Cognitive load. Absolutely.
The pause isn't just or shouldn't just be dramatic flair. It serves a necessary function related to our working memory. Cognitive load theory basically suggests that our working memory has a very limited capacity at any given moment.
So when you present a complex or emotionally significant idea,
the audience needs processing time. They need a moment to actually encode that information, connect it to existing knowledge, feel its weight. The strategic pause, theoretically, functions as a cognitive reset button, allowing that processing to happen before the next piece of information arrives.
Well, we need data on this.
We desperately need quantitative studies on pause duration, the context it's used in, and its relation to information density. Does a 3-second pause actually work better than a 5-second pause after a complex point? Do longer pauses demonstrably increase message recall for high-density content compared to low-density content?
We can't just rely on the guru's gut feeling for timing anymore. We need evidence-based metrics for the pause's functional utility across different speakers and audiences.
Precisely. And finally, the whole feeling of connection itself needs to be mapped more rigorously onto emotional contagion mechanisms.
The neurological foundation of connection?
Yes. Connection, in part, is about the successful, rapid transfer of emotional state from the speaker to the audience. Understanding the neurochemistry, the timing, the specific verbal and nonverbal cues that reliably trigger this transmission, that's the difference between just hoping for connection and potentially engineering it more reliably.
Okay, so this deep dive into research naturally leads us into the necessary digital era adaptations. The analysis talks about moving from cathedral to forum architecture.
Right. The Maxwell model, arguably, was perfected for the large stage, the big physical room, the linear structure of the cathedral.
That old model being the linear model.
Yeah.
Speaker radar, message, radar audience. Pretty much unidirectional. High friction for feedback.
Exactly. If the audience doesn't understand something or disagrees, they typically have to wait until the very end, maybe for a Q&A, to offer feedback, by which point the potential for real-time connection or clarification is likely lost.
But the digital world, with its tools and expectations, demands something different. It demands the co-creative model. Speaker left-right arrow message, left-right arrow audience.
With required, often real-time, feedback loops built directly into the communication process. Communication is no longer conceived as a monologue delivered. It's much more like a living negotiation of meaning.
And this necessitates significant technology integration, doesn't it? Not just using tech for streaming, but using it interactively.
Absolutely. We need digital tools integrated specifically for audience participation and, crucially, for measurable, aggregated response during the communication event itself.
So things like integrated polling, Q&A features, maybe even real-time sentiment analysis based on chat or reactions?
Exactly. Tools that allow the speaker to get instant aggregated feedback on the perceived understanding or emotional response of the virtual or even a digitally connected physical audience.
Which then allows the speaker to perform those halftime adjustments that the old framework demanded.
But based on actual measurable data in real time, rather than just a subjective read of body language in the third row of a dark auditorium. It makes the adaptation more scientific, less intuitive guesswork.
Okay, so if we apply all this research and technological potential, the analysis suggests we must then deconstruct and actually replace Maxwell's core principles with updated communication laws designed for this new architecture.
That's the proposal. A renovation.
So first, the old law of connecting needs to evolve into the law of co-creation.
Yes. Communication must be redefined not primarily as the delivery of fixed expertise from guru to audience, but as a collaborative meaning-making process. The goal shifts toward building understanding with the audience, not just transmitting information to them.
Okay. Second, that requirement for self-transcendence needs a critical update.
It does. The analysis proposes a law of authentic presence. This requires a careful balance between self-awareness and the audience awareness.
So you can't just get over yourself entirely.
No, because your unique experience, your perspective, is part of the value you bring. You need self-awareness. But you must maintain that while simultaneously engaging in hypersensitive audience monitoring and modulation based on feedback. It's a duality, not a negation of self.
Got it. And finally, the concept of halftime adjustments, which relied on intuition.
Must be codified and made more rigorous as the law of responsive adaptation. This means dynamic adjustment based on those quantifiable feedback channels becomes a measurable, structured necessity within the process.
Removing the heavy reliance on pure instinct or decades of experience to read the room.
Exactly. We are essentially trying to replace charismatic faith and anecdotal evidence with scientific rigor and structural adaptability, building a framework for the modern communicator, not just replicating the masters of the past.
Okay, Solarian. We have this blueprint for renovation. It sounds compelling, integrating science, digital tools. But let's be really practical now. Who gets left out of the original model? The analysis strongly implies that if the system relies heavily on a rock star's unique ability to pull off the performance, it fundamentally has accessibility barriers to mastery for the average person.
That's the harsh reality, isn't it? It's like a charisma tax baked into the system. We have this enormous, potentially unbridgeable gap between natural giftedness, that innate stage magnetism some people just have, and truly teachable, replicable communication skills. The analysis calls this charisma dependency.
And the best system in the world, the best steps and techniques, simply cannot impart that kind of stage presence or magnetic personality to someone who fundamentally lacks it.
Right. So the framework, while claiming to be teachable, ultimately fails to fully democratize the very talent it champions and relies upon for its most potent effects.
And then there's the severe experience requirement we keep coming back to. How do you shortcut the decades?
You probably can't, not fully. The system explicitly, or at least implicitly through the guru's own story, demands extensive practice, those 13,000 speeches, for genuine mastery, especially of things like the pause. For the new professional or someone just trying to improve their meeting presence, this is incredibly demoralizing, isn't it?
Yeah, if true mastery is potentially 30 years away, the framework starts to feel less like a reliable handbook for the novice and more like a prophecy justifying the guru's own extraordinary success after decades of work.
Exactly. And we also have to address the issue of cultural specificity. Are these really universal laws, as claimed, or are they built upon potentially unexamined, underlying Western individualistic assumptions embedded deep within the framework?
What kind of assumption?
Oh, concepts like self-transcendence, the specific way personal failure is deployed for connection, the emphasis on the individual's journey. These rely heavily on a cultural context, often Western, that values the individual's personal narrative as the primary engine for learning and change.
And that might not map well onto, say, more collectivist or high-context cultures.
Precisely. In some cultures, personal narrative might be secondary to group identity or established roles. Explicitly detailing personal failure might be seen as eroding communal authority or causing loss of face, not necessarily building personal connection in the same way it might in, say, the U.S.
So the framework assumes a specific kind of psychological contract with the audience that might not be universal.
It likely does. These significant potential limitations require dedicated study, which brings us directly to the future research needs highlighted in the analysis. If we are serious about building the next generation of communication frameworks based on science, what quantitative data do we still desperately need to acquire?
Well, based on our discussion, we definitely need rigorous quantitative studies on pause effectiveness and message retention. We need the actual metrics.
Right. Does a measured 3-second silence at the end of a high cognitive load sentence increase audience recall by a statistically significant 15% compared to a continuous flow? We need that kind of data, not just anecdotes or intuition.
We also need neurological imaging during factual versus narrative presentations. We need to see the brain scans in real time, comparing different types of stories and factual deliveries.
We need hard evidence that the mirror neuron activation is genuinely, measurably higher and different during, for example, the me story with you meaning formula compared to simply delivering the facts and figures or other narrative structures.
And given the cultural concerns you just raised, we absolutely need comprehensive cross-cultural analysis of connection-building techniques.
Yes, we must test whether vulnerability deployment or specific storytelling structures or even the function of silence works the same way psychologically and effectively in Tokyo as does in Tulsa. Or do different cultural contexts require fundamentally different connection strategies and frameworks? We just don't have enough robust data on that.
Okay, so let's bring this all together now for our final synthesis. The enduring principles versus required evolution. We've torn down the cathedral of theory, perhaps, but the analysis acknowledges that some of the foundation stones were well laid and absolutely must be salvaged.
Definitely. What Maxwell undeniably got right. The timeless elements identified are powerful and really non-negotiable for effective communication in almost any context.
Such as?
The fundamental audience-centric orientation. That shift is critical. The recognition of narrative power, understanding that stories are how humans make sense of the world, the underlying continuous improvement mindset, the validation of practice, and using authenticity, however defined, as a credibility foundation. These remain critical.
Even if the deployment of that authenticity needs scientific refinement and cultural adaptation.
Precisely. But the required updates outlined in the analysis demand a truly systemic overhaul, not just minor tweaks.
We need the deep integration of scientific validation, neuroscience, psychology, sociology, to replace the heavy reliance on faith in anecdote and personal charisma.
We need clear adaptation for digital landscapes and the co-creative potential they offer. Crucially, we need genuine democratization for non-charismatic communicators, making the system truly work for the dedicated, competent professional who might not be a natural-born rock star on stage.
And finally, globalization, ensuring the principles are tested and adapted for cross-cultural effectiveness, moving beyond potentially narrow cultural assumptions.
The future communication framework, the analysis concludes, must be built on verifiable data, it must be adaptable to the medium, and critically, it must be accessible and effective for everyone seeking to connect, not just those already gifted with superstar presence and decades of practice runway.
So ultimately, we appreciate the genius, the impact, and the scale of the original framework.
Absolutely. But the structural flaws we've examined show a system built, perhaps inevitably, primarily for the celebrity who perfected it, rather than being grounded firmly in the science that could replicate its best elements and truly democratize mastery for all.
And that's our deep dive for this week.
Remember, the most dangerous illusion is the one you don't know you're in.
But now you know. So here's our question for you. Now that we've torn apart the cathedral of communication theory, what's one story you need to stop telling yourself about how you connect with others?
Let us know in the comments.
Question the narrative.
Deconstructs the dogma.
See the system.
We'll see you next time. Stay skeptical.